And connecting. Dr. Fauci,
Hey, hi, Jeff.
how are you?
I'm pretty well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was just saying I've been doing this Instagram live show on the Washington Post for several months, and I've had famous musicians on and comedians and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But I've got to say, I've never been so nervous as talking with you because, like the lyric goes, the nation turns its weary eyes to you, right?
Well, I don't know about that, but we'll do our best.
So thanks so much for being with us. We did a feature in the Post a few weeks ago in which we asked a few experts, including you, some very pinpoint advice. And you also shared almost like your personal habits. And I wanted to start out by asking you about that. Every day we find something else we're doing wrong or right, or it has to be shifting. I used to use this. This was my buff.
Right.
And then I read an article that my buff is worse than nothing. Today, I was reading about the fact that I keep my mask on my rearview mirror, and that's a terrible idea. I want you to tell me what do you do? What kind of mask do you wear? How much do you wash it? Tell me about your practice.
Well, I don't know if everyone is able to do this. I have a bunch of the paper type masks and a bunch of cloth masks. Okay.
So like this sort of thing?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I wear that a fair amount. And what I do is I make sure that I put it on this way and take it off the same way. When I'm finished with it, I generally put it in a pile and I have 3 or 4, and then I just wash them in a typical way. The paper ones, I essentially do the same thing. Some of the paper ones can be washed. I don't hang it up anywhere. I don't do all those other things that you're concerned about. I do a pretty easy thing. Put it on like this, keep it on, and then when I'm done with it, essentially I wash it. That's what I do.
And no touching. I mean, I think the distinction here is you don't touch the front of the mask.
Exactly.
You don't get your fingers inside it, right? The thing that the article about the hanging it from the rear view mirror was that we don't realize how much our masks are gathering.
Right.
As we go. And so we're really not. Now, when they say that that's not good, is it not good for us, the mask wearer, or does it still protect the people outside?
Yeah. I'm not sure about the rear view mirror thing, Jeff, so I don't want to be quoting anything on that. So, because I will be taken out of context. The one thing that I think we need to reiterate for people is that a mask that's on you is much more efficient in preventing droplets and viral containing aerosols out to the outside. It is also obviously protective against things like droplets that come your way. But the major reason that masks became almost universally recommended was the realization that there are so many people, up to 45% of people who are infected, who don't even know it because they don't have any symptoms. So it gets to the point, if you could kind of orient your thinking, as strange as it might sound, Jeff, is if we all assume that we're all infected and we're all without symptoms, so we're not going to get sick, but there's a danger that we might infect somebody else. That's the reason for having a mask. You have the secondary benefit that if there's somebody out there who's infected, that you're protecting yourself. But if everybody would wear a mask, it would be, I'm helping society and society's helping me. That's the reason for that.
Yeah. Does it, tell me something, you've seen a lot over these last few months. Does it drive you nuts when you see a picture like that? That's at a sandbar somewhere in the United States. These people are all gathered. I mean, every day we see a picture of a concert. We see Sturgis, the motorcycle rally, and then we see something like this. Does it make your blood boil when you see something like this?
The answer, Jeff, is yes, but my blood evaporates when I see people inside in a bar or in a crowded area. Because even though the picture you're showing, technically, potentially, in reality, because of the close proximity without a mask, is really not a good thing to do. What's even worse is indoors, in a crowd, without a mask, with poor ventilation. Because outdoors is always better than indoors. And I think here's where people get confused. If I was going to, I mean, you're right, that's a disturbing crowd, Jeff. But if you're going to be in a group like that, which there's really no reason to be doing that, that even though outdoors dispels things much better than indoors, when you're that close, you should be wearing a mask. Where people get confused is that at every aspect of outdoors, you might want to keep a mask with you, but you don't have to necessarily wear it. And that's where you want to make sure you don't say something that people scratch their heads and say, that doesn't make any sense. So if you're going on a hike in the woods and there's nobody around for 1,000 yards, you don't really need to wear a mask. What you want to do is that have it with you so that if you happen to be put into a situation where there is an inability to physically separate, you can immediately go, okay, do that. But the idea, I mean, like last evening, I was jogging in my neighborhood and I could see, I live in a tree-strewn neighborhood in Washington. I could see like a couple of 100 yards ahead of me. Nobody was there. You know, I had my mask like this and I was running along. And then as soon as you start to pass people where you can't stay a good distance, just, you know, do that, period. I think when we start to ask for unreasonable things, that people start scratching their head and say that doesn't make any sense. So masks clearly indoors. I mean, there's almost an instinctual reaction to say, oh, I'm inside with a group of people I know, so I can take my mask off. See, what you're forgetting is indoors clearly, particularly if you can't physically separate, is much worse than outdoors.
Yeah, and I think we all go through that calculation in our heads, even when we're with people we quote unquote know. Then you think, oh, but wait, that person had this person over last week, and who knows where that person. I mean, the safest thing is obviously to wear a mask. So another thing that's really been, I think, is on everybody's mind, collective thoughts. We're talking about school, and we're all getting different plans as parents, and we're all contemplating different things and debating them, and in some cases arguing with each other about them. And I want to ask you about this, the back to school plan. I happen to have a 10-year-old, so we're talking about 5th grade, and I have a wife who is a college professor, and I'm in the Boston area, and they're both going back to school, and you know, I'm a little terrified of this. So the school plan on the college level, I'll just tell you, this is Northeastern University, is there are multiple tests that students are going to be doing when they come back to campus. My wife will be taking multiple tests. They have a plan in place, they say, if someone is positive, to quarantine them immediately. That said, the idea of thousands of college-age kids coming into our city and joining up is scary. So tell me your views on first the college level.
Yeah. So it really depends. First of all, I think it's important for people to understand college is different than elementary school because you have people coming in from all different parts of the country. In general, when you're talking about schools, and I'll get to college in a second, Jeff, is that it depends on the location that you're talking about at the state, city, and county level. You know, the CDC comes out with a designation of green, yellow, red. Green, a certain test positive, certain number of cases per 100,000. Yellow, same thing. Is it 5 to 10% positive and 10 to 100 cases per 100,000? And red, greater than 100. If you're in a green zone in general, there's much, much less punity or a good degree of impunity vis-a-vis risk of getting infected, but you should have in place how you address when you get an infection. If you're in a red zone, then you really have to think twice whether it's prudent to bring the children back to school. If you're in a yellow one where there's levels of infection, you should have a plan. And the plan should be, can you safeguard the health, the safety, and the welfare of the children and the teachers? What do you do when a child gets infected? Do you have mask wearing? Do you have the degree of physical separation? How long can you do outdoor classes, and what classes can you do outdoors? Can you keep children segregated when they're outside playing? Because groups together are the things that do it, particularly indoor. So always remember, outdoor, always better than indoor. Masks are very helpful, depends on where you live. The thing that's more complicated is at the university level, because you can't say, well, I'm in a green zone and the children all live within the zone of the school. So you're not having people coming in from all over. That's the reason why colleges have very, very different plans. Many of them test everybody before they even can come in. And then once you know that the core baseline is negative, then you could do intermittent screening in the sense of doing screening to see if you might miss some below the radar screen types of infection, because you want to get those, identify them, and separate them. So again, I'm not exactly sure what the details of Northeastern is going to be, but different colleges have different protocols to allow many of the classes, not all, because remember, you may want to have a hybrid. You may want to do some online. What about teachers who are in the risk group? Do they want to be face-to-face in a classroom? They may want to do it online. So again, there's a lot of variability depending upon where you are.
Our kid, our fifth grader, you know, they're supposed to wear masks every day inside all the time. They have mask breaks outside. This is according to the plan, which every plan always says this plan could change. And then also, they are only going for a half day, and physically they can choose to, and they will have instruction in the afternoon online. And then there's also an option you can do total remote learning. But, you know, for many parents who went through that in the spring, and let's not forget the financial impact and the fact that many parents have to work, it's almost unbearable to consider how we parent at home and work, you know?
Yeah, that is true. And that is the reason why we say, as a default position, the thing you should try to do the best as you possibly can is to get the children back to school. And then there's that big however or but. It depends on the things that I've just said. Where do you live? What zone? What can you do? I mean, obviously, it's a great strain, not only on the individual parents and the family, but on the economy in general, if you start disrupting it by not having people go to work because they have to stay home and watch their children. That's the problem.
Yeah. Dr. Fauci, I'm drinking from a Dr. Fauci mug, okay? And I was going to wear this, but I am a professional, so I thought I should not wear it. But, you know, I've got this Dr. Fauci T-shirt right here, right? I assume you are not receiving any of the residuals of all these products that are out there, right?
Absolutely not. Not
Is it
a penny.
strange to you? Is it strange that there are, I don't know if you Google yourself or look on eBay, but is it strange to you that you are a scientist and yet you've become kind of a folk hero here, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, Jeff, I actually don't pay attention to that because that could really be distracting. I mean that sincerely. So I don't see that part, the hero part, and I don't pay attention to the death threats and the harassments either. So,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, we live in an extraordinary society where, you know, public health issues become so politicized and divisive that when you start talking about prudent things to do to preserve the public health, that's actually considered by some, hopefully a really small minority, but by some, as something worthy of threatening you. I mean, that's really is really rather bizarre.
Do you and we're going to get back to the science, but I flip around the channels at night, which I probably shouldn't, and I find this guy. This guy Tucker Carlson. You heard of him?
Yeah, he's the guy that really loves me, right?
Yeah. So look, I mean, the other night I found one that said, "Lord Fauci," he called you. Has America put too much faith in just one man? Unelected Fauci has been leading this country, and Fauci has made a lot of wrong predictions. Does that get under your skin? Does it bother you on a humane level? Do you feel threatened or concerned when you see that sort of thing floating out there?
Well, I'm not concerned that what he says. It's a little bit. I mean, I think you could say that when he does that, that triggers some of the crazies in society to start threatening me, which actually happens. I mean, who would have thought when I was in medical school doing things to save people's lives, I'd have to be going around with a security detail. I mean, that's really ridiculous.
Yeah, so you have to do that. You feel that there's that much concern. Yeah.
I don't have to do what the government decided on the basis of the threats that they were tapping in on, that I needed it. I didn't ask for it.
So it's heartbreaking to think about, because we know what your motivation is, which is to do the best you can, knowing that we can't always know everything, right?
Yeah, what I think gets confused, and hopefully, if you give me 30 seconds to explain it, that people don't understand. No, really, is that science is an iterative, self-correcting process. When you're involved with a static situation that doesn't change, then the scientific facts and what you use as evidence to make decisions, policy, recommendations shouldn't change much at all. But when you're dealing with a moving target, an evolving pandemic with which we've never had any prior experience, you've got to make decisions and recommendations based on the data and the evidence that you have at any given time. But as the situation evolves, so too will the evidence, so too will the data. And you need to be humble enough and flexible enough to change things based on what the latest data and evidence are. That is interpreted by some people as science is wrong, they're changing their mind, they're fooling us. No, what you're doing is you're being flexible enough as you learn more and more and more to make the data and the evidence drive your recommendations. And that's why I don't pay any attention to what you just showed. In fact, that's the first time I've seen that stuff. I've just heard from people that he's trashing me on TV. Fine. If he wants to do that, let him do it. I'm not going to get distracted by that.
I think the damage that occurs when we watch that sort of thing, it's, there's a certain level of entertainment, but there are people who actually listen to folks on TV, right? And in opinion makers. And we lose the basic guidelines of what we should be doing to keep each other safe. And that's what I find just the hardest. The fact that there's been any debate on masks is just crazy to me, Let me ask you about vaccines. A couple things. One is, I've seen you talking about the idea that perhaps there will be a vaccine available by the end of the year or early next year. We've seen with testing that where you live, how much you earn, and obviously the color of your skin makes a big difference as far as how easily you get a test in many cases and how quickly you get that result back. Is there anything you can tell us about how we can be sure that whatever vaccine we approve is distributed fairly and people are going to get it across the board?
Yeah, I can tell you the process that is in place now to see that that's the case is that the federal government is doing advanced purchases for the vaccine. So it is extremely unlikely that at least in the first round of things, you're going to see vaccines that some people can get and some people won't. So we brought in someone who is an expert in supply chain and distribution, actually an Army general, General Perna, that's part of this Operation Warp Speed that has been developed to guarantee that we have hundreds of millions of doses by 2021 and the end of 2021. There is committees, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that advises the CDC. The National Academy of Medicine has a committee now that the NIH and the CDC asked for to complement that decision-making process, to have a prioritization of who should be getting the vaccines. Obviously, frontline healthcare workers, regardless of what your race or ethnicity is, because you're putting yourself in harm's way to take care of people with COVID-19. Then there's the vulnerable people. There's people who have underlying conditions. And clearly, when you look at underlying conditions and vulnerable people, minorities, particularly African Americans and Latinx, are very, very heavily represented in that group. So even though I can't personally guarantee it, I can tell you that the system is being set up to make sure that there's equitable distribution.
I'll tell you, it's when you look at the pluses and minuses of reopening and reemerging and doing whatever we do, one thing that's just tortures me personally, and I think many people, is my looking at the variables really in what this COVID-19 does to people. And you hear all these stories, anecdotally, you'll hear a story about somebody who's had it. Oh, I'm fine. I mean, my grandmother, who's 99, had it, showed no symptoms and was okay. But then you hear this heartbreaking story about a 35-year-old in perfect health who does not make it, or it takes months and months to recover. Why is this? Why are there so many variables in how people respond to the virus?
So that is, you've asked a lot of good questions, Jeff. That's the most important question, because it's at the root of the misunderstanding, the real misunderstanding about this virus. So as you know, I've been chasing viruses, as it were, and responding to outbreaks now for almost 40 years, right from the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic through pandemic flu, Ebola, Zika, anthrax, all that. This is the only pathogen I've ever seen that has such a wide range of manifestations that you have to scratch your head. There are 40% of the people don't get any symptoms at all. Generally, young people do not get sick very much, nor they require hospitalizations, with exceptions that are real exceptions, some of which you mentioned yourself. Then as you go on, there are some people that require feeling poorly for a little while. Some people are in bed for weeks with residua that lasts for maybe months or so, maybe longer. We don't have enough experience to know how long that is. Some require hospitalizations, some require intensive care, some require ventilation, and some die. If you look at the statistics, clearly the elderly and those with underlying conditions have the worst problem and the likelihood they'll have a poor outcome. The problem is that younger individuals who likely will not get any symptoms, with the exceptions that we know, they likely won't get any symptoms. There is the understandable perception on their part, and I would say innocently, because they're not thinking about it, is that if I get infected and I get no symptoms, who cares? I'm in a vacuum, I'm not going to hurt anybody else. That's incorrect, because inadvertently you are propagating an outbreak that is killing some people. Because by your getting infected or not caring if you're getting infected, what you don't yet realize, but is true, that it is likely that even though you have no symptoms, that you will pass it on to someone else, who will pass it on to someone else, who will pass it on to someone's mother or father, grandmother, wife on chemotherapy for breast cancer, an immunodeficient child. So when you're dealing in a global pandemic, and in this case, a domestic epidemic, you're not in a vacuum. You're either going to be part of the solution by protecting yourself, or you're going to be part of the problem of propagating it. What a difficult communication message that is, but it is the truth. So we're trying to instill in people the know you have your own personal responsibility to not hurt yourself, but you have a societal responsibility for not propagating something that is bad for the economy, bad for employment, and it happens to be killing some people. A lot of people, Jeff, 164,000 people have already died in this country. So this pandemic is a really, really bad thing. So why do you want to be part of the propagation of it? And that's the reason why in our divisive society, it has become really, really driven. You have people on one side and people on the other. So instead of looking at public health as a vehicle or a mechanism to safely open up the country, some people look at public health as an obstacle to opening up the country. And it shouldn't be that way. There shouldn't be the mask wearers and the non-mask wearers. It should be society pulling as a whole to get this darn thing under control.
Well, we agree with you. I mean, what can we say? And as a parent, it's your responsibility when you're dealing with children who don't have the control to explain to them that yes, you're probably not going to get very sick, but you're going to pass it on to your grandparents or your teacher. So you need to really follow the guidelines. Hey, my editor said I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this. When was the last time you spoke with President Trump?
Just a couple of days ago. I briefed him about vaccines. It was sometime this week. Yeah, a couple of days ago.
I want to ask you about Dr. Birx and Dr. Atlas. Dr. Atlas, who we didn't know and now has sort of emerged on the scene. First of all, Dr. Birx, she's faced some criticism for what people have said is sort of appeasing or approving or nodding or accepting some of the non-scientific ideas that have been floated out there in this political climate. Which you have not really been criticized for that sort of thing. And it feels like you've taken a different approach. My theory is that she's trying to work with people who maybe are not always open to the science, and she's doing the best she can to keep their ears. That's a very charitable thing to say, maybe. But can you tell me about that? Because you have great respect for Dr. Birx.
I do. And she's really has a very, very difficult job. She really does. She's much more in a political situation than I am. I mean, she works in the White House. She has an office in the West Wing. My primary responsibility is I'm the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at NIH. I have to develop the vaccines and the therapies and the drugs and things like that. Her primary responsibility is in there. So I think your first interpretation, what you said is charitable, is true. She's doing the best she can. There's no doubt about that.
We sit there and we watch when somebody suggests the idea of spraying bleach into your body, and we want her to stand up and scream, right? And right. Do you talk with her about this sort of thing? Have you two, I know these are private conversations, but do you counsel each other on how to approach this situation? Because it can be a public health problem when bad advice is floated out to millions of people.
Yeah. The answer is yes. I'm obviously we speak to each other about those things. I've known her a very long time. She's fundamentally a really good person who's really very, very, very difficult position she's in.
Dr. Atlas, do you know Dr. Atlas, and what should we know about him? The alarm bells that we've been concerned about as people concerned about safety is it seems that what we've heard from him largely is open up, have a college football season, open the schools, open up. What do you know about Dr. Atlas?
Well, I just met him a couple of days ago, yesterday, the day before, and I really am looking forward to having the opportunity, and I spoke to him about that today, about getting together really soon and really finding out exactly how he feels about things rather than what you read about or hear about. Because you want to be fair to people. You don't want to be taking what other people saying their thoughts are unless you yourself sit down and chat. And I'm looking forward to that. And as is he. I want to find out where he stands on certain things to see if there are differences. And if so, how can we resolve them? Because we all want to work together on this.
Do you want to be back at these briefings every day? Because we looked to you as a voice of sanity, or do you prefer to do what you've been doing, which is going all over the place and spreading this message?
You know, I like it this way, where I can be on a discussion with you without being in a situation where it's a perfect setup to pit one against the president. When you have the president and you on the same, I mean, everybody's watching every move. You put your hand here, you scratch your ear, you scratch your, you know, it's not the right way to educate the public and to get people. So I much prefer the kinds of things we're doing now, where you get the opportunity one-on-one, be it in a television interview, a radio interview, or a podcast, Instagram. I think it's much more productive than the things we saw back then. I would rather see the president up there alone, giving his press conference, doing his thing, talking to the American people, and then let me and my colleagues have the opportunity to get into the details of the science.
I know you've got to go, but I've got a couple important things I want to ask you. One is that we haven't spoken about voting. And do you plan to vote in person, or are you planning to vote by mail-in ballot, or what's your thought on that? I'm a little I'd prefer to vote mail-in because I just don't want to be standing in a line somewhere worrying about the person behind and in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, I likely, Jeff, will vote in person, but under the circumstances that if what I see in grocery stores, what I see at Starbucks, what I see is you get 6 or more feet X, stand here and don't move until the person ahead of you. I believe that the polling stations are going to do that. If they do 6 feet, I wouldn't have any problem. But I absolutely understand people who have a concern about that, who should be able to vote by mail.
You know, when this started, my wife said I was insane because I was like washing the nacho chips in the and washing all the fruit in soap, and I really was terrified of any contact outside. And I've adapted a little bit. Tell me how you've changed your personal habits since this whole thing started. Are there things you'll do now that you just would never have done when it started?
Certainly. I do this like a couple hundred times a day. We know that the virus, for a limited period of time, can live on what you call fomites, which are inanimate objects. You know, so what I do, for example, when something comes, a package, you know, I don't scrub it down. I just leave it on the side for a couple of days before I open it. And even that is probably overkill, Jeff, because most of the things we're talking about, this is fundamentally a respiratory-borne virus, even though there is the possibility, if not the reality, of some small part of it being transmitted by things that you can touch. So I think washing hands really so much obviates the need to be cleaning everything around you. The one thing you could do very easily is you could wash your hands. So if somebody delivers a package to my house, the mailman or FedExpress or what have you, you pick it up, you put it down, and then just wash your hands, as opposed to having to spray everything that comes anywhere near your house. Hand washing is really an important thing, as is mask wearing, as is physical distance, as is avoiding a crowd, and as is outdoors better than indoors. So, you know, I say that to everybody as much as I can, because in those states that have had surges, they've turned it around by doing those 5 things. For those states and cities and counties that have done that a fair amount, they've prevented the surges. And they're not rocket science things. I'll say them again: wearing masks, physical distance, avoiding crowds. Outdoor is always better than indoor. When indoor, open windows, ventilation. washing your hands. And there are certain hotspots of transmission. One of them is indoor bars. We know that because in those places that have closed the bars or don't allow it, their infection rate has gone down.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is mental health, and we're not going to go into this deeply, but I'd be curious. I don't know if you're a music person, if you like films, but we all have found the need to find a psychic escape from the endless sense that the world is ending. I mean, it's very, very hard. What do you do? Do you put on a particular record? What do you do to cope with that?
You know, I'm a bad example, Jeff, really, because I wouldn't want, because I mean, my job is surreal. You know, I work 16, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I think I will get to that at some time. But right now I'm focusing on getting us a vaccine and some drugs. But having said that, I'm an outdoor person. I've been an athlete most of my life. So my way of unwinding is going for long walks in the parks and the woods with my wife and my daughter's dog. And I love that. And that really, you know, that decompresses me, even though, you know, it's not as much as I usually like to do, but it really, to me, is kind of getting into the real world for 45 minutes to an hour.
And I think at the beginning of this, people were closing everything down. And in even responsible places, they were closing parks down. They were closing outdoor areas down with acres and acres of land. But now I think people have recognized that we need those places, and it's very low risk, really.
You're absolutely correct, Jeff. And that was what I was talking about, is as you are learning in uncharted waters, sometimes you do things that you think are the right thing. And then as time goes by, you say, wait a minute, that's not the right thing to do. And I think what you said about outdoor and parks is clearly an example. Probably the safest place that you could be is alone in the woods, walking with your dog or walking with a family member who you're with all the time anyway.
So look, Dr. Fauci, look, by the way, my daughter made this sign. The poor girl she graduated high school in this weird way, and now she's going to defer college. But I asked her to be creative, and as you can see, she made a little beaker there, and this R, it's these weird tentacles.
She's very autistic.
She is. I mean, she's got to do something. You know what I mean? I'm so appreciative of you coming here and talking with us. If you could, for those of us who are sometimes wake up with this feeling of doom, that how do we turn this around? How do we stop the suffering? Can you tell us what keeps you going and why we should be optimistic? And that's the last thing I'll ask from you.
Well, that's a good way to end the discussion, Jeff, because this will end. I mean, when you're in something that's so stressful, you have to worry about despair setting in. Like, my God, I'm in a hopeless situation. It's not. It will end. We will get out of this and we will return to normal. So it's really one of those situations. Don't give up. Don't despair. Don't throw caution to the wind. We can end this. A combination of pulling together with public health measures and the scientific advances of vaccines and therapies and preventions. I will guarantee you that